Jason, welcome to the Research Labs podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We will talk a little bit about what we're doing right now. Before we begin, I would like to also mention that I love LinkedIn and I use it almost every day. And I have had I would say, a relatively overly positive experience on LinkedIn compared to any other social media service. And a lot of things I was able to do, let's say professionally speaking, was because of LinkedIn. And the idea that I'm talking to someone who works as a designer, especially in the trust team of LinkedIn, I would say I'm honored to have this conversation with you, and I'm really excited to be asking questions which I think everyone has when they use LinkedIn, because we are on the other side. So I would say this is going to be like a sneak peek in behind the scenes of how things are done. So welcome to the show, and thanks for all the beautiful features you're building with LinkedIn.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the kind words about LinkedIn. I've been working here for about 4 years now, and it's really great to hear that people really love the platform like yourself. And I think one of the things when I joined was just learning how great the team was. I had friends that worked here before I joined, and they would always talk about the culture and how great it was, and I was like, this really can't be true. And then I joined, and I was like, yeah, it really is true. There really are great people that work there. So I'm equally honored to be working there.
I see. Could you so before we jump into LinkedIn, right? I think you have been doing a lot of work even before you joined LinkedIn. So I would say I actually want to start way back when you first decided that product design is something that you would want to pursue as a career. Could you talk a little bit about what was it like when you were first discovering, let's say, UX and UI and product as a whole? How was that like?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've been I graduated college around the year 2000, so that was quite a long time ago. But even at that time, obviously, we knew that the web and internet, you know, activities or projects was going to be a really important issue. And so I decided at that point that I wanted in some way to be part of it. Um, and so when I graduated, one of my first jobs in the field was working at a company called BarnesandNoble.com. And so there I was, originally started working as doing kind of production design, if you will. The terms obviously for what we call the work that we do kind of change over time. And at that time, there really wasn't anything called user experience design. I mean, it was kind of it was just a term that was has been built on over the years. The same with product design as well. But my role there was really kind of doing almost like daily advertisement. So we think about Barnes and Noble's featuring our products. This is on the homepage of BarnesandNoble.com, and so I would basically build those out. But as I was working there, I was asked to join in part of the what they called like the product page. So essentially, if you think of a book has a page, and on that page there needs a bunch of different features that they would have. So it'd be reviews or details about the product, details about the book. And so being on that page was really great. It introduced me to all the different things that we currently do. So user research, creating wireframes, all of that. And that was kind of really my first taste of that. At that time, there were kind of the role that I was in, which was like production design almost. So we were using Photoshop to build our assets, and then there were people that they called information architects, and they were doing essentially the wireframes, but also creating models and diagrams and things like that. And that was kind of the world. I think now it's much more complicated. We have design frameworks and design systems, and so things have definitely changed. But that was kind of the way it was then. Um, And so, yeah, that was like my first kind of foray into what would be now considered kind of user experience design. Um, so it was interesting at the time.
And what so you talk about, the I think the very early days of design. I don't think I understood the internet. I understood internet in 2008. So I think this was way before that. So I would say, you have a very good perspective as to how things were in the very early days and how they are now when we have tools like Figma, which is, I really find Figma very mind blowing, even though I use it every alternate day. But so if you had to like put the whole thing into perspective, right? It's a 22-year long journey. How would you describe, let's say, how things were done then and how things are done now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point with Figma. I think, really it's the tools that I think help us do the work that we do. And even before Figma came around, of course, there was Sketch. Before Sketch, there was similar tools. There's tools that kind of still split down that visual design and the you know wireframe modes of thinking, right? And so there would be, things like OmniGraffle that people use to make wireframes, and then they were still using, Photoshop to create the actual visual design assets. But I think with the, when Sketch came about, and you can really, I think of like Figma as just the next iteration of Sketch, and sadly, I think the Sketch guys have really kind of dropped the ball with not being on the web. That was, I think, the Figma's amazing differentiator is that on any browser you can do the work that we do, which is just amazing. So I think I think of Sketch and Figma in the similar where that they're really game changers. They had a really simplified palette system. You could on any laptop be able to design these experiences. I remember having to use Photoshop and even Illustrator, and I'd have like all of these special palettes and all of these like layouts for these palettes, and I have like almost a whole screen dedicated to these different palettes. And you know, but when Sketch and Figma came about, they just made things contextual. If you're on a text box, then you see the text, right? So the text editor. So they just just a lot of really smart decisions that they made, and allowed you to design in a way that really made sense, where you're kind of combining both the kind of wireframe aspect of things as well as the visual design, and it's all into one product. So that's I mean, that's kind of the way that I think about it. When before that, like I'd mentioned, it was like using Photoshop and using Illustrator, which were great tools, but they really aren't set up for building UI design, I would say. And that I think that was the main differentiator.
Could you also share a little bit as to, like the work culture is going very remote, like meetings are getting eliminated completely, especially physical meetings, right? And over, I think there is a lot of emphasis on all the new tools that are coming in. And as soon as all these tools are coming in, they are, I think they're almost overselling collaboration at this point. You know, like if you're not have a collaboration feature, then it's next to useless nowadays. So how do you make sense of it all, because everything is changing so fast, and how do you not go insane with how things are going at this point?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think there are a lot of tools to do the things that we do, right? And I think at the end of the day, though, I still think that you need to get one-on-one FaceTime with people, and whether that is through conversation like this, through a web conferencing technology, or you're actually in person. I still think you can't get that back and forth type of discussion unless you're doing it kind of live, right? But there are some tools I think that are helpful as well. I you know One of the tools, speaking of this, I just recently used. I would- my so this month has been a lot of people going out on vacation, but we're still like trying to get work done. And so I had a week where a lot of the people that I normally work with were out, and I was like kind of heads down and able to do some design work. And so at the end of that week, um, I was going on vacation the previous week or the next week, sorry. So I was like, okay, what's the best way to like really just show the work that I've done in order to like get the get the the ball rolling right when I get back to work, which is essentially this week. Um, and so I used this product called Loom, which was, allowed you to, share your screen and do a video and talk through it. And um, that was actually worked out really well. I mean, that's the first time that we'd use it. We're kind of piloting this tool right now at LinkedIn, and so I thought I'd give it a shot, and it did work well. But now that I'm back in person, of course, it's we're back to having meetings like this, right? Like I don't imagine us using it, but for that specific use case, when I was out and I needed to, really hand off some ideas on a product, it was helpful. So, um, but yeah, I mean, I think that there tools will come and tools will go, and there's people that are um, like to be on that bleeding edge. And then there's people that like to wait for things to be a little bit more, you know, just be more established. They would say before they start using it. I myself am, I don't mind trying out new things, and I think that is just one of the things I personally feel like is important. Is to just really keep fresh on things. So I don't mind if something is not working exactly right, or it's still being developed. I still think it's important to try it out. But I think that's a personality thing, and I think you can't expect the whole organization to just simply take up a new tool because it's neat and new, right? Like there's people that will go out, and then there's people that will just wait. And so I'm kind of a little bit more on the bleeding edge. I think that's just my personality. Um, and I've been a big advocate for Figma and for Sketch when they first came out, and that's kind of proved to be the the direction that the organization was going. And I think generally, just if a product is really game changing in that way, it'll just clearly show itself, right? Like people will talk about it, and just the same way that Figma has taken over. Um, if it's really that game changing, it'll just be obvious, So um, yeah, but you do need different types of people to explore it and to be okay with bugs and things like that. The early adopters. I think that's really important.
You bring a very good point where you talk about how the usage of products really comes down to people's personalities. I think which brings me to my next question. And I think since you work in a team of a product which is as broadly used as LinkedIn, I'm very sure, these are the kind of discussions you must be having internally where there are so many different kinds of people using LinkedIn on a day-to-day basis. So how does the decision making process internally happens? Is it like, you divide the members of LinkedIn into cohorts and try to experiment accordingly? Or I would say simply put, I actually what I want to ask is how do you build a product for such a wide audience? Or you think about it in a different way, maybe.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think there are, as you said, there are just multitudes of people, and I think of different types of people. I think previously, one of the ways of thinking about that would be to think about it as personas. Um, you would kind of understand a archetype of a person and then try to design for them. Um, I think the way that we've tackled the kind of framework that we've decided as an organization to use is the kind of jobs to be done framework. So, depending on who you are, it could essentially be the same person, but you just have different jobs during a day or whatever. It might be a month to do that. And I think that way of thinking, I think, makes a lot more sense. I think you could have somebody who's 50 years old and lives in Indiana. They're looking for a job, and then the next day, the next month, they found a job, and now they just want to get industry news, right? That could definitely be the same person, but if you were to go the persona route, those would be two different people, and they would constantly stay like constantly looking for a job, So that I think that personas, I think for some companies and for some products makes sense. I think for us, the jobs to be done is really a good way for us to think about it. But then there's also a notion of like, as a company, what do you really want to focus on? Like you had mentioned, you really can't focus on everything. And so, where's the area that you want to target? So as a company, we've decided to lean in a little bit on creators, and that's an area that we think is really important. And so, um, you know, if in the trust side of things, it doesn't really it impacts us a little bit, when we think about how settings are built and what creators might be doing on the trust side of things. But for the most part, we're still thinking about the things that we need to worry about on the trust side. But as an organization, we are focusing more on that, and that's just a kind of a decision that we've decided to do. We think there's an opportunity there.
Do you think the focus on creators came like very recently?
Um, it's been a focus for us for a couple quarters now. It's just it may not be manifested necessarily in the product. It just takes time to build out the features and things like that. But it has been a focus for us for a little while.
I see. So does this mean that we are going to see a lot of, let's say, analytics tools for, let's say, video and things like that?
We actually already have some of the analytics tools, but really, it is kind of it would essentially be agnostic of your content type, right? But we do want to provide tools like that to help people just better understand how to create on LinkedIn, and just enable them the best way possible. So yeah, that would essentially be something that we could consider, um, and really just like kind of focusing on what are their activities, and thinking about it from that jobs to be done kind of framework. Um, Again, I'm not really on that team, so I don't have too much insight into that. But I do know that is a focus for us.
Well, could you share, let's say, some of the problems or the discussions that are happening in the team that you work in? I'm aware. I think you work in the trustee. Could you share, let's say, a little detail as to what what are the challenges you guys are working on?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I work on the trust team, and one of the things that I first started working on when I joined the team was transparency around reporting, and so um, we want to provide people the ability to understand what's going on with a piece of content if they've reported it. And additionally, if you were an author, we want to let you know that your content has violated our policies, and we've taken an action on it. And so building out that experience has been really kind of great for me. I've been able to think about that as a more of a holistic thing. We're also doing a lot of research. I have really great product and um, research partners that we all work collaboratively on this project, and we've been working on this for almost 2.5 years now, and just talking to members. That's what we call our users. We call them members, about this problem, and kind of understanding what it is from their perspective, and starting out just really sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. I apologize. Um, but just starting out really at a foundational level, trying to understand their their thoughts on if they report something, if they hear back and it doesn't go in their favor, for example, or if they've written a piece of content that's been taken down, what do they feel about that? And then all the way up to like showing them concepts of how we're thinking about expressing this. We've just learned a lot through that process. And additionally, um, we know that for some pieces of content, um, one of the things that we've kind of built is this kind of framework of this way of thinking about it. Whereas there might be people, and essentially we think about it as like a spectrum, right? So on one side, there's content that is, completely within, all, it's completely allowable on our platform, if you will. And this content is, really great content. People, really enjoy engaging on it. And then on the other side, there's content that is clearly does not belong on our platform. And that would probably be content that maybe doesn't belong on anybody's platform, right? This is the really bad stuff that probably nobody ever sees. And, but, there are some people, some bad actors out there that do try to upload these things, right? So those are like two extremes of this spectrum. And then in the middle, there's all these different flavors of pieces of content. And so, we've started to realize like it's really not just black and white like that. There is a whole spectrum to this. And so we know that some people might think that our policies might be too strict, right? So on one side, they'd say like, I don't see anything wrong with this content. Why did you take it down? And then on the other side, there might be people that say like, why didn't you take this content down, right? So there's all these different permutations of that same spectrum. And so as a team, that's kind of the way that we think about it, and that's the way that we try to align our products and constantly kind of use that framework as a way to think about the different challenges that we might have.
Well, I'm actually thinking when you talk about the spectrum, right? It's such a gray area. I think we're witnessing a lot of headlines about, let's say, other platforms and their policies a lot in the recent times, especially I would say Twitter, which was in the news quite a lot. So, do you look at Twitter and think, how can we better design our policies to help the users? Because I think this is something we discussed last time as well, that when you're working on a product like LinkedIn, which when you are actually entering new unknown territories, how do you really decide if something will work or not? And I think since the last time we have had a conversation, I've been trying to think about it, and I don't think I have an answer yet.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I learned once I joined is that our policies are kind of ever evolving, right? And in my mind, I always thought it was something that they were pretty set in stone. But the policy team is constantly looking at like different types of content, and if something was taken down, and then they say, well, should this have been taken down? So they're also constantly evolving those policies, and so those policies get expressed, and then they are actually handed to the team that actually does the content moderation, and they're updated as well. So there's this kind of like a a life cycle there, and so it's really not something that is is just set in stone. And of course, there's also like things that come up, right? There's always going to be maybe some um, new conflict in the world or some new issue that will people will start talking about because we are a business platform, but also people talk about their lives and talk about things that are going on in society as well. And so these are things that will constantly also need to be updated. Um, and so that is kind of like I mentioned, that's constantly kind of being updated. Um, and for some people, they may not agree with it, and so they may not agree with a content decision. And so we also allow people the ability in the product to, um, you know, ask us to take a second look. And so that's something that is for authors currently available, and if they don't agree with our policy, we allow them to take a second look. And but we know that there the chances of us kind of getting it wrong are actually pretty slim. It's just might be the author might not necessarily agree with the decision, but there are times that we do get it wrong, and we're all kind of human at the end of the day. And there are human reviewers that once if somebody were to ask for a second look, then we do have a human reviewer look at that. As well as if you were to report something, we have a human reviewer look at that as well. So, these are, like you mentioned, it is other companies kind of have this similar issue, obviously. I think one of the benefits, as we all know, is that LinkedIn is a professional network, and so there is some of the materials that even our members would just say, okay, this doesn't belong there, right? And so they do. Um, we've learned from members in our research that people report kind of for the betterment of LinkedIn, right? And so they're not necessarily reporting for themselves or reporting because they say, okay, this doesn't belong on LinkedIn, which is really interesting. I don't know if that's the same for other networks. I don't work at other social platforms, but it is something that we do see and we've learned many times from members. Um, so that's and so that helps, I think, with just keeping some of this content that is not great from appearing on a platform, or at least as in a large following that you might see on Twitter, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that is actually very true that if I had to measure platforms from a positivity quotient, then LinkedIn is really positive when you talk about things like that, especially when the community and the network comes together to help someone find a job by commenting and liking posts for more reach. I think that's one of the examples when just everyone just comes together to help someone. And I
Yeah,
see it every day, at
yeah,
least one or two posts, like thousands of people are just commenting so that someone can help that person out.
yeah. It's really great, and I do feel like there's a lot of positive feedback to those moments, and I think on the other hand, people not to like go immediately negative, but I think people also know that about LinkedIn, and so they will post con- content that will kind of elicit that emotion, and it might not necessarily be true. And so one of the things that we see is people um, repeating. Some people will take a snippet of content and maybe that appears on Twitter or whatever, and they'll just literally copy and paste it into LinkedIn. And so then we see other people copy and pasting that, and it's really like it's some amazing story about whatever it might be that they helped some homeless person or whatever. And the story is, it might have been true for the original person that wrote it, but we do see people, repeating that over and over just to get likes, and you know, that's 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 just it's a bit of like taking advantage of the system, but also we have ways to detect those as well. So that's something that at least can get detected on the platform too.
I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see those posts also.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's unfortunate, but I think it's like
Yeah.
with the good, you're going to have people that take advantage of that too, right? So, but I think generally people are pretty savvy enough to kind of know the difference. I think, and that overall is my general wish for. I think just the internet in general is that the longer that we are work in these environments and these social platforms, that people will just become either immune to things like that or just become savvy enough to know the difference. And I think um, I hope that that's where we'll get to, and people won't be so, just caught off guard or not expecting something. They'll have seen it enough and realize it. Um, but that's a. I'm usually a very optimistic person, so that's kind of my outlook on things.
And also you mentioned a very good point where I think members of LinkedIn come together to make sure the platform is clean. I would say is that was it by design or it just kind of happened that way?
I would definitely say, we have policies that enforce that. So I would say, there is that aspect of it, but also I would say it kind of is a natural thing. I mean, we started, originally LinkedIn was just a resume site, right? And so we introduced the feed, but I think you know people knew the difference between Facebook and LinkedIn, and they kind of ideally realize like what should be on LinkedIn and what shouldn't be. And that has just had a natural way of thinking about it. You do see people that might share something that other people might not think is in a professional context, and so they will literally say like, "Oh, I think this should belong on Facebook." They'll say that in the comments and things like that. But I think what is important is that we would just want people to express themselves in ways that they feel is important, right? I mean, one of the things about working is that in more recent times is that we want you want people to bring their whole selves to work, right? You don't want to have be two different people. You don't want to be one person at work and one person at home. um, we'd rather people be just authentically who they are. And so I think LinkedIn kind of reflects that same attitude, right? And so and more recently too, so there is that natural tension of like, okay, maybe this person is oversharing, and they might overshare at the water cooler too in the office, right? And so people might not congregate around the water um, when that person is around. And so similarly, somebody say like, oh, I'm not going to engage in this post because I just don't think that this is appropriate. But that is kind of defined by the people in the network, right? And so that content is you can say I'm not interested in it, or you don't, you can scroll right past it. You don't have to interact with it. And I think if we are enabling creators enough to get that type of feedback that, hey, this type of content I can clearly see, like I talked about my dog or whatever it might be, right? That is just not professional enough on this network. And so maybe next time I won't write that. So ideally there's that natural feedback loop in the system, that we're building, that people would understand that and post things that would be the best for our network.
Are you saying there will be a you're trying to design a feedback loop which will kind of let creators know this is not working? So that part is, I would say, obvious, but how will it reflect, let's say, from a feature perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm more leaning on the more obvious parts of it. Again, the feature perspective, I think would on my part just be speculative at this point because I'm not really on that team. But I think there are ways that we can inform people, and the analytics I think is a good example of that. You know, and you can even see it even now, like right, you can see posts that people comment on or not, or people like or not, right? And so um you so there are currently in the system, there are already these feedback loops, I think, that people can understand and then dig in a little bit more. And then having analytics will only really help them understand that more. So that's kind of the things I'm referring to. It's I'm not like you know, pointing at some feature that we're going to be coming out because I don't really know it, unfortunately.
So could you also share like the kind of features, let's say, your team is directly involved in?
Yeah. So again, I mentioned working on reporting. That's one example. We're also working on the actual reporting flow. So if you were to say, okay, I want to report this, then that's something that we work on. There also is the notion of trust. There's trust teams that are kind of work um, on a specific product, so they also work on trust features, whether it's on the jobs team or on the content feed team. There are trust teams there as well, and we work, in collaboration with them. Um, and and as far as like additional features, some of I don't work on these, but some of my team members work on settings. And there's a different account features as well that are under our team as well, so different account states. So you might be familiar with one of the features that we have is account memorialization. So as our social networks get older, there are unfortunately people that pass away, and you might have an account that somebody reminds you of their birthday and they've already passed, which is just really a tragic moment, and nobody wants to be reminded of that. So we have a feature that if you're a family member, you can request to turn on memorialization for someone who's passed. And we have a special kind of banner that will show up on their account, and then you can't obviously interact with them, but if you wanted to go back and see their posts or just look at their work history, that's available to you. But they wouldn't necessarily, appear if it's a very popular name. Take my name for example, Jason Frasier. There, chances are there's a bunch of different Jason Frasers on LinkedIn. If you were to search for it, the name wouldn't come up at the very top, right? We would try to limit that search. But if you had a direct link to their profile, then you would be able to see it. So that's like one example of an account feature. Hibernation is another one. So if you need to take a break, and so there are different account states that we're thinking about and continue to develop. Um, and then more on the trust side of things, or I guess the security and safety side of things, we also deal with, if your account has been taken over, which, unfortunately does happen. Um, we have tools that will help you kind of get your account back to the way it was before. So somebody might, go in and message a bunch of people, or they might change um, your description or whatever. So we have tools that can help you once you get your account back. So that's kind of some examples of some of the features that we're working on. One of the bigger ones that a colleague of mine has done recently is just settings, and so we've recently are starting to redesign settings, which um, is a really big feature and a really big effort. And I think we're all really proud of that work. We're kind of introduced this new design system almost about a year ago. And so we've brought settings into that new design system, and so it's much cleaner, and it's kind of a much better experience now. So that's been a big effort for us as well.
I would say thinking about all the different features you mentioned, I don't think I had these platforms are evolving very fast, right? So I would say I wanted to ask how these are very new features. I had not thought about them. So how do you come up with ideas where you're trying to introduce something which has not been done before? Like how does that process work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for us, and I'm sure for other product teams, it's really about listening to members or users, right? And so doing that initial foundational research is just really important. And oftentimes you get insights into how they use your product or how they use LinkedIn in ways that you just hadn't thought of, right? And so, everybody comes to LinkedIn from a different profession, or they're in a different age group, and so they use it differently. And so, I think doing that foundational research is the way that helps us, you know, really understand, like, where do we want to be going with this. And I think probably for other teams, they use that more so. I mean, one of the things for trust is that you know when we've recently kind of ramped up our team within the last 2 or 3 years, and so there were a lot of just really low hanging fruits of things that we knew that we needed to do, um, and those are things that we've kind of tackled. And now that we've gotten a lot of those things done, now we're able to kind of take a step back and say, like, okay, well, what are some other things that we want to accomplish that are a little bit more um you know not reactive, and a little bit more like, this is how we think is that we should do this. And so being proactive about it, and really getting ahead of it is kind of what we're trying to focus on now. And hopefully some of these features that we're working on, you'll be kind of seeing in the next year or so. As with all things, it just takes time. And so of course we would love to have all these features out right now, but it does just take time.
I see. Could you also share, how have you guys organized yourself? Like how does a typical work week look like? Is it a lot of meetings? Is it a lot of design meetings? Is it a lot of strategy work, especially from your perspective? Like what do you spend most of your time doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, so being a principal on the team, I I kind of like I have the projects that I work on, but then I also will kind of help out other team members that are maybe like, for example, somebody's going on vacation, or somebody just needs additional help on a project. I will come in and kind of like help out, and just really kind of like lay down the framework and the foundation of it, and then I'm able to kind of pass that back off. Um, but on a weekly basis, I would say usually I have meetings in the morning, and then usually I have the afternoons that are mostly free for the most part. And so the deeper work that I need to be doing is usually done in the afternoon, which is a little bit counter for me because I'm a bit of a morning person. But we make it work. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a combination of having one on one with folks. So I think one of the things that I'm fortunate to do in my current team is I have a great relationship with my manager. He has one-on-ones with all of our designers on the team, and I pretty much have one-on-ones with all of them as well. I'm kind of focusing a little bit more on the design side of things, and he's focusing a little bit on the career sides of things. So I'll look at work from other designers and kind of provide feedback, and just also be kind of a sounding board for them too. If they're going to have a presentation that they're giving, I'll kind of give feedback on that. So that's kind of allowed me to just have a good idea of what all the different design aspects of the things that we're working on. Um, and I kind of really enjoy that. Before coming to LinkedIn, I was I managed and led a team at a UX consultancy, and I enjoyed doing that role, and becoming a principal has allowed me to kind of go back and focus on the design work. But I really enjoy talking to other designers about design work and getting the details. So this role has kind of allowed me the ability to do that, which I definitely appreciate.
Mhm. Does it also involve looking at, let's say, a lot of user feedback, like members' feedback, and like, try to understand what they're, what is the next thing we should be focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, so usually when we look at that, it's more on a project basis, right? So, for example, we use the redesign of the settings as an example. So we'll initially do card sorting activities to with members and have them organize the settings that they think make sense, and then we'll design that. And then we'll put those designs in front of members, maybe with a few different varieties. Um, and so it is a little bit more feature focused. One of the things that we're working on now is the reporting flow, and so we've put together a few concepts on how that reporting flow should go. um, and we really went pretty wide with that. Like, we came up with some really different ways of thinking about it. And then now we're kind of iterating on that right now, and we're about to take that to them as well. But there are some projects that we do think about a little bit more foundationally, um, and in order to kind of get that more like longer term strategic kind of way of thinking about it. um, but like I said, we're just kind of now turning that corner, right? So we had a bunch of reactive kind of projects that we were working on, and now we're in the place where we can start thinking a little bit more long term, a little bit more strategic on some of these features. So we're just starting to think about that, I would say.
And are also a lot of projects that let's say that you guys work on, how are they decided? Is it a lot because like, are they decided based on user feedback, or is it something that you guys feel like a team thinks that this is something we should pursue next, or it's a little bit of both?
I would say it's a little bit of both. I mean, it's we have there's a lot of different ways that I think a project can get greenlit and move forward, and one of those would be based off of feedback. Or other might be, it's the next logical iteration of a version of a project that we've been working on. And then there's also just executive feedback too of our roadmap. And so, you know, executives have insight into different parts of the LinkedIn ecosystem, and so they'll seeing that perspective, then they'll say like, okay, I think we should focus on this. And so those I'd say would be the three kind of ways that I think a project would get worked on and greenlit. And then of course, as with any big organization, there's some projects that kind of move forward to a spot, and then because of resourcing, we have to pause, and there's other initiatives, and then ideally we'll pick it back up. And so that's just kind of the nature of the beast, I think. But there is differing ways for a project to kind of move forward and see the actually get launched on LinkedIn. But yeah, I think did I answer your question? I'm not sure if I did.
Yeah, yeah. So, the reason I asked that is because no matter how big the company, there is always so much you can do, you know. So it's all and let's say for a platform like LinkedIn, I'm sure optimization of decision making is always like prioritized. Like how can we get more done with less resources? And I think when you start thinking like that, it all comes down to, how you decide what's next.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that I've continued to learn how this is done at LinkedIn. I mean, before that, I was as I mentioned, I worked at a UX consultancy, so it was really just like we worked on the projects that were brought in, right? And so it was a little bit easier for us to prioritize, is because a client wants us to do it and we do it. Of course, there are different priorities within the project, but getting insight into how a company at the size of LinkedIn makes these decisions, it is pretty interesting, and I've definitely learned a lot through that. And a lot of it is just what is the priority of the company, and things should kind of roll up to what that ultimate priority, and what are the priorities of the things that we want to achieve as a company. And projects should kind of roll up to that. So if that priority does shift, then there might be some projects that may not, may get paused, or may stop being worked on. And again, that's just kind of the nature of the beast of working at a big company. um, I think resourcing is always a challenge. I think no matter the size, if you have more resources, essentially you'll kind of spend them and get them working on something, right? And so, then there's just more that you can do. So, we have that challenge now. There's projects that are kind of below the line, if you will, that we would like to see, but it's just kind of it's just kind of the way it goes. And hopefully, we as a team have chosen the right priorities. And, you know, you can only kind of move forward with the information that you have at the time. So, um, yeah, but it is a challenge, and it is something that I think specifically the product team, thinks a lot about, and working closely with engineering. It's something that is constantly top of mind, I think, for them.
Hmm. Do you also work closely with the engineering team?
Yeah, I mean, I would say depending on the project, some projects, like I mentioned, this reporting experience, we have projects where we're trying, smaller initiatives. And then we have some even within reporting, so we'll go out and try some experiments. But then there's projects that are a little bit longer term that we're probably working closer with research and product on. Once those get a little bit more finalized, then we'll work with engineering. Um, but but engineering is still in the loop on these projects as well, so we definitely don't want to broadside them with some huge project that they didn't see coming. And also just to have them feel involved too. So when we do things like workshops, um, and presentations of where the work is, well, obviously engineering will be present at those. And I would say a lot of the really good ideas that people, just kind of came out of left field, like, oh, actually, yeah, that's a good idea, come from people that aren't, doing the design day in and day out. So I think it's really important to get that type of feedback, and have people involved at that time in a project.
Yeah. When I'm talking to you, right, you really give off a vibe that you really enjoy what you do right now.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I to be honest, I work with a really, really great team, and I think, it's not often that you find a team that just everybody works really well together. From research to the other designers on my team to the product team and engineering, data science, everybody is, really involved and interested in the work that we do. And it kind of makes it a pleasure to work with these people if everybody's engaged and likes the work that we do and has a positive attitude. It just really makes all the difference, I think. I think, egos are always just checked at the door and everybody's open to feedback. And to me, it's just really a great way to work. And I feel fortunate that I've found that, with our team.
Apart from work, how do you think you organize your life? Like, yes, I understand, you wake up in the morning, you have meetings, you work. But apart from that, what would you be doing, let's say, on a weekend or on a holiday?
Yeah. I mean, I think organizing my life, I think is one of the constant challenges. I think, there are people that I think are very good at having lists and different ways of just making sure that they're accomplishing the things that they want to do. I think I try those things and I'm like, I just kind of fall back. But so there's like projects around the house that I'm probably should be working on that I'm not. But I think I have a wife and two wonderful daughters, and I think we just try to spend quality time with each other. And so if we don't get to that project on the house, then we just don't get to it. And then additionally, I'm really into road biking and recently got into kind of riding gravel as well. And so that's a big priority for me. I've done some, longer rides, not competitively, but a thing called a Grand Fondo. So I've done a few of those, which I really enjoy. And I'm signed up for a bigger one in September that I probably should be doing more training than I am on it. But those are just kind of the things that I'm interested in. But the whole organizing part of it, I think, is something that I'm still trying to figure out. And if you have any suggestions, I'm definitely open to that.
So when you say Grand Fondo, that means 100K, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So which is, around like 80 miles, something like that. So I did one of those in April, and yeah, it was really great. It's called the no, sorry, it was Levi Grand Fondo here in Santa Rosa in California, and yeah, it was great. And just being able to train for that, and do it in a way that you feel really good after that, right? So it took me about 5 hours to do it. And I've done that many a time before where I'm just completely depleted and exhausted. And this time I felt like I was trained up enough and I was able to enjoy it. And I think to me, getting to that
Yeah.
moment, that spot where you're trained enough is important. So for this bigger ride, I'm like constantly keeping that in the back of my mind that I need to, I need to train more.
Yeah. Actually, I did one last year, a
Oh,
Grand
did you?
Fondo.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it took me 7 hours. My
Yeah.
first one, but
Oh,
I'm
that's
gonna
great.
train up and let's see if I can do another one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. They're a lot of fun. And it's just great getting together with so many other people that enjoy biking. And yeah, it's really great. I enjoy it.
I see. I would say, we have come towards the end of the podcast episode, and I hope you had a great time talking to me.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. And, when I was thinking, like, what are we going to talk about for an hour? I think you had just really great questions. I think that, hopefully I was able to answer in a way that is helpful for people. But yeah, I just really appreciate the opportunity. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, I would say when I came in, my only motivation was to really understand how things are done from your end. Because, if you talk to, like, we had a discussion last time, we talked for like 15, 20 minutes. and that's not really enough to really understand the day to day of how decisions are made, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Definitely.
think you have a very complex job actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm a work on a horizontal team, so the things that we work on aren't just in our little silo, right? We have to talk to other people within our organization, which is actually really great. You get to meet a lot of folks in an organization, and you also get to learn what their challenges are and what the things that they're working on, and how your little project can fit into their roadmap and things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting way to work, and I would suggest for people that want to get more exposure to your company to work on a horizontal team is really great. You get to meet a lot of people across the organization.
So I would say I would like to end with the last question, which I actually thought before I came in. The other questions I don't really think about is, when you design a product, the kind of product like LinkedIn, you are actually impacting a lot of people, and not just in your region, but I would say now it has a very global impact. Do you think that kind of responsibility, like do you feel that on a daily basis, or is it something that you have kind of learned how to deal with?
Hmm, that is a good question. I mean, I think that in some ways that responsibility is distributed. I would say, right, and so I would, for a new organization or a company that's smaller, as an individual, you might feel that impact more closely, right? Because you're probably doing more than one thing. For a company to have a trust team means that we have other teams working on other parts of it, right? And so I think, I think you can think of it as a foundation, right? So we've built all of these foundations in order to have kind of a stable building. And, all of these people kind of work in an effort to move forward. And I think, that's the challenge, I think, with that is being able to shift and respond responsibly or or easily, and that's challenges that I think that any big organization has. Um, but but for me personally, um, I definitely feel that I know that there are other people working on other things and thinking about it as deeply as I am on my specific product, and so I don't kind of feel that as much. But I think the area that we do work in is an important part of LinkedIn, and I think it's important, I think, for me to think about that. And actually, even your question kind of makes me think about it. And oftentimes I think you can kind of not have your eye on that. And I think it's important to kind of like come back to that and make sure that you are, you know, realizing the gravity of some of your decisions. I think that it is important. Um, so but also on the other hand, you do need to sleep at night, right? And so, it's funny. One of the things when I was interviewing, I would ask people was just a simple question, and you may like this one or not, but I would say, what are the things that keep you up at night, and what are the things that get you up in the morning, right? So it's like kind of two sides of going to sleep. Things that people worry about, and then things that make them excited to get up out of bed. And if I were to think about that from my job, the things I worry about is really just making sure that we're listening to our members and really understanding what is their challenges are, and are we designing things appropriately to what we're hearing from them. If we get that wrong, I think it's pretty pivotal. Um, and then the things that get me up in the morning, I think, are the things I expressed already, which is just having a really great team and being really interested in this area, and finding parts of the job that really are interesting. And for me, I like just the ability to you know think about problems in a really deep way. I really enjoy that, and then also being able to describe that back to people. That's kind of my the things that just get me up in the morning, I should say. So yeah,
Hmm. That was very nice.
thanks.
Yeah. I mean, your team literally has the word trust in it. I mean, to put trust in your team name, I mean that's a lot of work already.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, right?
Yeah, a lot
Yeah,
of pressure. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, yeah,
Jason, this was very nice. This was
yeah.
good.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me.